Hello YouTube, this is Jonathan, and for this video series, I think there's going to be two videos, we are going to be looking at an older version of Axis and Allies. This is the third Axis and Allies game to be released, the second theater version, the first being Europe. This one is focused on the Pacific. Now there is a newer Pacific version, Pacific 1940, that we've looked at already, which is a much newer game. It came out in the late 2000s, I think maybe 2009, and then there was a second edition that came out a couple of years later, maybe 2012, I think it was. But regardless, this version here came out way back in 1999. So that gives you an idea of the difference. So there are a number of things in this game that harken back to classic rules. Like, for example, unit costs are a lot more. When it comes to fighters and bombers and battleships, cost 24, and there are no cruisers in this game. But there are destroyers, and destroyers attack and defend at 3. They cost 12. They can coastally bombard, but they only coastally bombard at a 2, for whatever reason. But otherwise, they're like destroyers as far as their anti-sub capabilities. Subs get first strike if they are attack, or get surprise attack if they are attacking, but not if they are defending. There are a number of other things they decided to try in this game. America gets a unique unit called Marines. You can see there are a few green infantry that are of darker color. Marines cost 4, and if attacking as part of an amphibious assault, they attack at a 2, even if there are no artillery. Something else unique about Marines is that even if they are not the ones participating in an amphibious assault, if they are attacking a territory in which you are assaulting, so let's say, let's come over here, and let's say that you control Siam, just throwing out countries, you control Siam, and you got some Marines here, and you move them into Indochina, and you do an amphibious assault from the other side, these Marines get their bonus. They get to attack at 2. Now, one of the first things that I thought of is if Marines cost 4, and artillery cost 4, and artillery always attack at a 2, why would I ever want Marines? Well, it kind of comes down to the fact that the U.S. is going to be doing a lot of amphibious assaults. But again, Marines only attack at a 2, so that's no better than artillery. Well, keep in mind that at this point in the evolution of Axis and Allies, your transports can hold either 1 tank or 2 other units. So you could get 2 artillery, or you could get 2 Marines or 2 infantry. So at face value, it still seems like 2 Marines are going to do the same thing as 2 artillery, at least in an amphibious assault. But if you pair a Marine with an artillery, then that Marine actually is going to attack at a 3 in that amphibious assault. So you get to attack with a 2 and a 3 off of each transport for the cost of 8 IPCs. So that's really where the value is going to be, I think. Now, there are also, you'll see these little signal or signature icons here, several places on the board. There is one that looks like a plane, that is an air base, and one that looks like an anchor, that is a naval base. Now, the rules for these are a little bit different. If you're familiar with a global, these are different than that. So the air base basically allows friendly units to consider the sea zone as well as the island to be the same territory, and that applies both when taking off as well as when trying to land. It works both ways. So in that regard, it can potentially be even better. You could potentially get 2 extra movement out of that air base, whereas in global you only get 1 if you're flying air base to air base. The naval symbol actually is not quite as good as other versions. You can move 3 spaces if you're leaving a naval base, but only if you are also going to a naval base. So you have to go from naval base to naval base, but you can do that. If you do that, you can move 3 spaces between. But if you're just moving from a naval base, or you're moving to a naval base, you're like out here somewhere, and you move to a naval base, then you do not get that benefit. So that's another way that it is different. There are really 3 powers in this game, but let me get into that in a little more detail. So of course you've got Japan. We all know that. This is Axis Ally specific. Of course you're going to have Japan. You have the United States, which is over here, and it also controls China. Nothing too terribly odd about that. But you also have Australia and India. So these are both controlled by the British player. So this is typically considered a 3-player game. Neither of them have much production. They're controlled by the same player. They use the same units, and they go at the same time. But they have separate IPC counters. And you can only build stuff in Australia that comes from Australia's production, and you can only build stuff in India that comes from India's production pool. You also have a couple convoys out here, like you got a British one, or you've got a couple of them out here, and that money, from what I understand, can be divvied up however this player wants. Does he want it all to go to Australia, all to India, or split it up? America also has some convoy zones way over here. Got a convoy zone up there, convoy zone down there. The way to win this game, if you are Japan, you either take one of the enemy capitals, and there are 3, so you could take Calcutta in India, you could take Sydney down here in Australia, or you could take the western US that counts as their capital. And then you have to hold it without losing your own capital until the beginning of your next turn. You can also win as Japan by collecting 22 victory points. Now the way that works is on Japan's collect income phase, for every 10 IPCs they get a victory point. So that happens at the end of their turn, and if they basically last enough turns racking up enough money, then they can win the game. If you are the Allies, you win by either taking Tokyo and having not lost your capitals, or if you push Japan to the point where it collects 0 victory points on any given turn, then you win. In order to do that, you basically have won the game, because you would have had to... Japan itself isn't worth 10, it's worth 5, but that means that Japan is down to its island plus maybe 2 other territories. Like up here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is worth 7. So if they control just Japan and just this, then that's enough for them to collect a point. Now you'll see a lot of red chips all over the board. We'll get to that here in just a second. There are a ton of things. Japan has a ton of forces, especially Navy, and there are a bunch of things that it ought to do on the first turn. And while this would get really messy really fast, and really complex, and it would be a super long video if I tried to move everything around, I'm not going to do that. But I did want to indicate all of the places that I think Japan ought to attack. And I will go over those here in this video. I just put them out to make sure that I don't forget about anything. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into those attacks. So Japan is poised to hit Pearl Harbor. America has 2 battleships here and a destroyer, which in this version attacks and defends at a 3. So that's nothing to sneeze at, but we have massive forces here that we can send in, including a sub that we can use as cannon fodder, potentially. We could send the sub up here to disrupt that convoy, but America has a decent fleet over here. They're easily going to take that back, and they're never going to be without that money, and we will have sacrificed that sub for nothing. And that is one of the other things, just a quick side note. America and the British forces have noticeable fleets that are just out of range. Like we've got these guys over here. They can't really be hit. I mean, they could, but then Japan wouldn't be able to go after that. England has forces down here that Japan can't get to. England has a carrier with a fighter and a battleship down here that Japan can get to, and some forces up here. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the videos on their strategy, but I have some thoughts on that. So Japan's going to go after this. Japan is going to try and take out whatever navy it can and grab as much production as possible on the first turn. So if it can take out this sub, it'll do it. It's going to, these islands aren't worth a whole lot, but we might as well go ahead and take them. These islands are worth 10 amongst them. We're going to go ahead and take them. And I forgot to put a red ship on the Philippines, but we're going to go ahead and try and take that as well. If we can, actually, let's start up north. So I went back and forth a little bit on China. I have never been a fan of rushing headlong into enemy infantry because they're cheap and they defend it too. And in this version, China only gets 1 infantry for every territory with production it has, which is just really just 2. But it gets another infantry if the Burma Road is unfettered by Axis forces. So they can get up to 3 infantry, which isn't a ton. However, one thing that I'm thinking is these forces aren't really doing a whole lot anyway, and if we move these guys into here, because we want to go 1, 2, and take this territory, which is the only place that China can put units, we want to move forward, and in order to protect this position, then this guy has to move forward, and we want to take Hong Kong, and so maybe at that point we just press forward with the idea that we're going to swing around here and try and knock China out of the war. Now, remember that you get 1 victory point for every 10 IPCs. So if you are looking at the map and you see that your strategy is going to net you 38 IPCs on this turn, then maybe you switch things up so you go after a more pristine territory. In fact, that is kind of what drew me to Siam or Malaya down there, because I was coming up with actually 30, it was either 38 or 39. I was really, really close. I'm like, well, where else can I attack? And this is actually worth 4 production, so going after that means I can afford to not go after something else. It is unlikely that Japan is going to take one of these capitals. I mean, it could, but in my estimation, I think going with that victory point total is going to be the more likely way to win. And I kind of thought about the positioning of the U.S. because so Japan starts with a lowly 19 production. I think Australia is 20 and India is like 19. America starts with 75 production. Even if you go all out like this and you end up with, let's say, 40, 42 or 43 production at the end of your first turn, America still produces almost twice that. It's just a matter of running against the clock. And so when I think about it, I think that, okay, America is going to deal with Pearl Harbor. They're going to position themselves here on turn 1. They'll probably move up on turn 2. They'll be at the very edge of Japanese territory that's worth stuff, turn 3. Turn 4 and 5, they're going to be trying to push in here. Maybe like turn 5, turn 6, they do a landing, but it's going to take them that turn, maybe turn 7, to really get a foothold here. Then you're talking turn 8 to turn 9, assuming something doesn't go crazy. Up here, where Japan is relegated to 0 victory points. And so your goal as Japan is to win in less than 8 turns if possible. After making your moves on the first turn, you want to be looking for any stray allied ships, whether they be here, or they be here, or they be over here, and try and take them out. Your goal is just to slow down America as much as possible, because if you can get an extra, let's say, 2 turns out of it, then you should be able to win by victory points. And so my thought would be that you really want to gobble all of this stuff up, and then you'll probably have border skirmishes over here for most of the game, and moving into China, but you're just going to be focused on basically holding this and slowing down as much as possible the allies coming in. And then you just wait for that victory point counter to win the game for you. If you have an opportunity to take a capital, of course, go for it. But it takes... The U.S. is the only person who can build factories in this game, so you can't put a factory down here and get closer. You can't put a factory down here and get closer. It's going to take you 3 turns from anything you put on Japan to get to either of the capitals, and that is a ton of time for them to prepare. And you don't have the forces you have tons of forces, but they aren't in position to basically attack one of those capitals on turn 1 or in force on turn 2. So you really have to rely on that stuff you're putting up there, and it's just going to take you too long. Unless something really weird happens, which could. You position your transport somewhere, an ally doesn't see it, and then you sneak in there. But I think that's unlikely. I wouldn't plan for that to be a strategy. I would plan on gobbling up as much as possible, especially down here, maybe over here a little bit, inroads into China, and then just doing whatever possible to hold the U.S. at bay, pick them off wherever, if they split up their navy, and then do the same thing for the British forces down here. So those are my thoughts on Japan in this game of Axis and Allies Pacific, the original Axis and Allies Pacific. I think I'm going to make this series 2 videos. The second one mostly focused on the U.S., and then speaking a little bit about the British forces, Australia, and India. Hope you guys enjoyed.